I wanted to ask you about what is called the traditional agency business model. Um, I have my definition of when people say traditional agency business model, and there is this sort of school of thought that believes that the traditional agency business model is dead. Might be a bit doomsday-ish, but I guess it is sort of a challenge to um, you know legacy businesses within the industry to sort of rethink the business model that they take to market. And I wanted to get your take on that. What for you? Um, what's your take on it? Is the traditional classic agency business model, is it dead or alive? Is it dying? And how should agency owners, agency leaders think about their offerings and how they sort of satisfy their client and so on and so forth? What's your take on this?
Very interesting question, and I think will lead to probably quite a layered conversation. I mean, my starting point would be to ask you what your definition is of the traditional agency model, because I'm not sure that there's, we're singing from the same hymn sheet necessarily where that is concerned. But I think that, actually, I think media is probably a good space to start. When TV came along, everybody said radio's dead. It's the end of radio. If you look at radio, and then the internet came, and people say TV is dead. And now you look, and nobody will watch TV anymore because everybody's watching YouTube. But you look at the success of a business like Netflix, and you go, "What do you mean TV is dead? It's absolute rubbish." Radio is probably kind of more active in many markets and more successful than it's been for decades. But but you ask yourself, so why is it? Why did it survive? Why wasn't radio
Right.
dead when TV came
Right.
in? And I think it was because as a medium, it reinvented itself, and it said, what are we really about? And we're kind of in a new competitive landscape, and that forced radio as a category or as an offering to kind of rethink its proposition and reframe the value that it brings. And in doing that, and as is evidenced by the likes of a Netflix, I think there is an opportunity to grow and to really thrive. So, when I hear people saying agencies are dead, I'm going, yeah, agencies that haven't evolved are probably in a heap of trouble. And when I look at evolve, I kind of think that there a number of considerations there. The first one is to understand the complexity of touch points that we're dealing with today. Kind of from a digital perspective, from a PR perspective, activation, all your traditional above the line channels, that's become hugely proliferated. And that means that the type of outputs that you need to deliver has shifted and has changed. Audiences have become more fragmented. But I think most importantly, possibly, is the access that we have to data and measurement has significantly changed the ad game. I remember a time where, it was deemed to be a successful ad campaign if the CEO's wife liked the ad. The end. Whether it delivered sales or growth was immaterial. You lived or died by whether the CEO's wife liked the ad. Sometimes I wish I could bring that back, actually, because sometimes I think what the CEO's wife thinks, she is the audience, not a bad metric. But I think agencies have had to evolve in terms of becoming a lot more accountable for output. In terms of the commercial return that gets delivered. And I think agencies that have not done that and have not embraced smart thinking and strategy and data are at risk of falling behind. And I think it really talks to, I suppose, the shift from creativity for creativity's sake to creativity in service of growth and some key commercial metrics. And so once you in the business of solutions powered by creativity versus just creativity, I think then we get to a model that is more sustainable. The interesting thing, though, is in some ways, if I go back to those early days of, as you call it, the traditional agency model, I think in this whole evolution, we've potentially lost a little something. And going back to some of those early days wouldn't be a totally bad idea. Maybe it's about finding a hybrid model. And what I mean by that is that, the obsession with metrics and what we can measure and return on investment has become a bit of an obsession. And we see a lot of it play out in the performance media space. And so we've spent a lot of time building metrics. And now when I look at it, I kind of go, I'm not sure that we're measuring the right things. And creativity to an extent has almost fallen by the wayside. It's like we have fallen into the world of research and marketing science. And the magic and the illogic sometimes that comes with creativity is missing. And I think that the industry, to an extent, has abdicated a little bit of its responsibility to hold creativity up high as a superpower. It's quite interesting when you look at, where creativity has found a home in other industries. You take the tech industry and the media industry, look at the likes of a Google and a Meta. You see a lot of industries outside of advertising now flexing creative muscle, because I think the world has cottoned on to how important creativity is. And I think we as an industry perhaps have pushed that to the side a little bit in favor of measurement, in favor of data, in favor of segmentation. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to bring creativity back in, and lots of interesting conversations and case studies, certainly that I've seen over the past 18 months, that are starting to build very, very powerful arguments to get us back to a world where creativity and brand building and long-term brand building and creative initiatives are being appreciated again, and where we're able to start to demonstrate their value. And so that hopefully that gets us to trade out of this kind of short-term world that we're in, which is all about performance media and short-term and delivering, the daily results and the sales, and to actually start looking at kind of what is the slightly longer-term view again in terms of how we build proper brand equity, where I say to someone, like where people go, I actually love this brand. I actually love this business. I might not buy your product today, but I possibly will buy it tomorrow or next year. And kind of short-termism is one of my bugbears at the moment, because I think that the world is caught up in that we're in this world of instant gratification. Everything's got to happen today. Everything's measured today. No one's in a job for more than 10 minutes. And so that means that everybody only cares about this year and the results for this year, because next year that exec team probably won't be around. So they don't care. Their bonuses are not dependent on that. But I think what we're losing out on is the ability to continue building equity in the long term. And I think what we're starting to see is the commercial benefit of that being evidenced. So I hope that a little bit of the Mad Men era of agencies, when creativity was the hero, that we can get a little bit of that back. So I suppose, it's about evolving, and it's about a new model, and it's measuring. But I wouldn't mind a little bit of that traditional agency madness coming back in. I think that one of my co-founders always says, when you come to the agency, it shouldn't feel like maths on a Monday morning at school. It should feel like double art on a Friday. And sometimes I think we've become a little bit, too maths on a Monday and not enough art on a Friday.
Oh boy. Oh man. Thank you for that. Thank you for closing with that analogy. I think we can speak a bit more about creativity, because you are right. Like it's not in the best state right now. Whether on the continent and the rest of the world, especially with the influx of generative AI and everything around that conversation. But I wanted to talk to you first about creativity and some of the things that I have seen as, that I would consider your creative philosophy, or that of the Up&Up group. One of the phrases I've seen, and I think is also on your profile, is brutal simplicity of thought.
Yes.
And I can't help but to ask you that, how does this principle guide your creative process? And can you share some examples where simplicity, led to a real breakthrough idea?
Yeah. So I think that unfortunately, we live in a world today where we suffer a massive attention deficit. Nobody pays attention anymore. I think social media has got something to do with that, because everything is condensed into bite-sized bits of content.
Yeah, 10 seconds, 15 seconds.
yeah, shortened our concentration span. In fact, someone said to me the other day that apparently a goldfish now has a longer concentration span than the average human, which is pretty scary. And I've seen research done by a lady called Dr. Cara Nelson Field, who tracked, I think, 130,000 online ads across more than 1,000 brands in a study. And they looked at a 2.5 second threshold, which is basically to say, if I can't keep your attention for at least 2.5 seconds, that message wouldn't have docked. So it actually doesn't even matter if you like the brand or if you like the piece of communication. It's just wastage. And 85% of those 130,000 odd pieces of digital content that they've tracked didn't get to the 2.5 second threshold. So that's pretty scary. And I think that, that's where, for me, brutal simplicity of thought comes into play, because it is about looking at what are the only possible words? What is the sharpest message I can land with you? Because ultimately, from a marketing point of view, I've got to inspire you to think, feel, say, or do something different. I can't do more than that. Those are my 4 available options. But in order to do that, I've got to tell you a story about my business, my service, my product, my brand, that's going to convince you to consider me, that drives preference, that drives conversion. Somewhere you've got to go, I've got a need state or a want, and the story I'm telling you as a business has got to match that. And then hopefully the way in which I'm telling that story also drives competitor preference, because, as I said, the world would be a far easier place if there were no competitors. I just needed to figure out what Teo wanted, and then I'd tell him that this is what I can give you. But now there are other people trying to do the same thing. So, and because you've got a concentration span, less than a goldfish, I've got precious little time to tell you that story. And brutal simplicity is about looking at the complexity of the brand, the competitive landscape, the audience, and to go, how do we strip away everything that's not relevant? There's a beautiful story of a lady who walked through a craft market, and she saw this man, and he had carved these beautiful wooden elephants. And she questioned him, and she said, "These are works of art. They're absolutely exquisite. Well, where do you even begin carving out these beautiful elephants?" And he said, "I simply take a piece of wood and I cut away everything that doesn't look like an elephant." And I think that's kind of a beautiful articulation of the principle of brutal simplicity of thought, is how do you strip away all of the peripheral information, experience, nonsense that ultimately isn't going to change or shift behavior? And how do you get to, ultimately, if you can, the one word that you go, that is what this brand is about. That is what we stand for. Because that is what allows you to really quickly connect with your audience. That is what allows you to drive distinction in terms of brand, in terms of messaging. I think that if I look back at a business like the Takealot group, where we were involved and partnered that brand since inception, when it was a little business called Take Two, that we selling DVDs out of a garage in Belleville. And at the time you had the big Kalahari as an online retailer,
Right.
where we rebranded and we said, why take two when you can take a lot? And I suppose as part of that rebranding journey, one of the things we did is we looked at the category and we said, what is it that will get us to win in this category of e-tailing? And at the time, what we identified was that the biggest stumbling block in e-tailing at the time was not meeting the need of instant gratification. So if you ordered a book on Kalahari, you'd have to wait like a week or 2 weeks for that book to be delivered. And so we said, if we could solve the challenge of instant gratification in the world of e-tailing for Takealot, if we could just do that one thing,
Right.
it would change their fortunes. And so we had a brand in our stable that we worked with called Mr. Delivery. And we had a conversation with them and we said, what do your drivers do between, I'm sure they're busy lunchtime delivering food and dinner, and then for the rest of the afternoon? And they said, well, it actually is a bit of a problem because they just kind of hang around. And we said, well, not for much longer. And so we introduced Mr. Delivery to Takealot, and in that way created a distribution network that allowed them to get products into the hands of people within 24 hours, sometimes same day. And that's the kind of creative solution that fundamentally changed that business and its growth trajectory, to the point where you then saw the Kalahari fade away and Takealot actually becoming the hero brand, and effectively building e-tailing as a category in this market. For me, that's a beautiful
Right.
example of brutal simplicity of thought. When you go, let's
Wow.
understand the very core of the challenge that you face, and then look at how do we solve for that.
I think, like, first off, that was definitely brilliant. And I think it ties back to the point we were making earlier about how agencies need to think about their solutions today, is that it's about business outcomes over output, business outcomes over creative outputs. And that's the case here, because I'm thinking to myself, the traditional agency would not have thought about solving the delivery problem, like going as far as having a conversation with a partner, getting the partner interested, bringing them to the table, designing that solution, and then using creativity to really like skyrocket the whole thing. I think that was a perfect example. You've spoken extensively about, well, maybe not extensively on the podcast, but this about reclaiming creativity, you know, sort of ensuring that creativity maintains or retains the center stage, of the work that the agency does. How how can agencies do that? Because again, on one end, we're kind of challenging agencies to think about solutions, to think about business outcomes, to think about all of these things. How can they, in this sort of new world, still ensure that creativity remains at the forefront of the work that they do?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a particular passion of mine, because as I said earlier, I think we risk as an industry losing our creative edge to other industries and categories, which would be a shame, because it is our superpower after all. I think the starting point in protecting our creative DNA is to ensure that you bring substance to support the creativity. And that's really about strategic smarts. It's about data. It's about audience understanding. It's kind of going, how do you take this idea and you make it easy and unterrifying, if that's even a word, for a client to buy? How do you have the substance of data and strategy and smart thinking that supports creativity? Because outside of that, it just becomes subjective opinion.
Right.
Do I like it or do you like it? That's a very hard argument to have. And it's also a very scary space to be, particularly for clients, because, I've got no parachute. I'm jumping out of this plane and I've got no parachute. It's terrifying. Will it work or won't it work? Bringing substance to the game is a great way to support creativity. I think the second thing is to look at, how do you build measurement into the game of creativity? How do we measure what's working, what's not working? Because that gives us an opportunity to optimize. That gives us an opportunity to grow and to learn, not just from our successes, but also from our mistakes. And you then build that journey towards greater creativity. And I suppose the third component, which is incredibly important, is trust. And that really is about how you build powerful relationships. If you have the trust of your clients, and if they respect what you do because of the substance that you bring, because of how you measure, because of how you shine creatively, if you've got that trust basis, everybody feels more comfortable to push the boat out, to be a little bit more brave, to be a little bit more bold. So that trust component becomes incredibly powerful and important. I think that we are making great inroads as an industry, as I said earlier, to prove the commercial value of creativity, which is fantastic, and I think an important building block. Then I think that we've got to continue investing heavily behind creative talent, and we've got to look at how we build a culture that allows that creative talent to have a level of freedom and a level of madness, as I said earlier. I think that's incredibly important. I don't think we want to be so constrained by data and measurement that you don't have an opportunity to flex. A wise person once said, we're in a world where logic is totally governed, and everybody supports logic. We've got all these rules and laws, but who's fighting for creativity? You've got an entire police force making sure that we stick to the rules. but who's fighting for that little bit of madness? And if you look at the great inventions, in fact, referencing that beautiful Apple ad from the 90s that says, "Here's to the crazy ones," because the ones that believe that they're crazy enough to change, crazy enough to believe that they can change the world, are the ones that actually do. And if you look at the people that are featured in that ad, whether they be artists or scientists, there is a little bit of illogic, there is a little bit of madness in all of them. And I think we've got to try and find that balance.